Just went into a courtyard, sat down with them. There was all this kind of incense and stuff sort of floating around. In fact, picture this: the golden age of rock in the 1970s. Led Zeppelin, the gods of hard rock, stand at the pinnacle of their success. Stadiums tremble beneath their feet. Millions worship their music and they seem untouchable. But behind the curtain, inside dressing rooms and recording studios, something far less divine brews. A power struggle, a rivalry, a silent war that would eventually fracture the heart of the band. For years fans have idealized the dynamic between Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, the charismatic frontman and the mystical guitar wizard. But what if their partnership was more fragile than we ever imagined? Today Robert Plant finally breaks the silence, shocking fans with his revelations about the dark and bitter conflicts that raged behind Led Zeppelin's success from the very beginning. Tension simmered beneath the surface. Jimmy Page was Led Zeppelin's architect, the mastermind behind their sound, but Robert Plant, the voice, the fire, often felt like he was suffocating under Page's dominant. Page demanded control. He dictated the arrangements, he layered the guitars, he crafted the sonic landscape, and he expected Plant to simply fit into his vision. But Plant wasn't the type to be silenced. He wanted more influence, more space to express himself, and over time his resentment grew. The recording sessions for albums like Houses of the Holy and Physical Graffiti became battlegrounds. Plant fought for more personal lyrics, for a sound that embraced his evolving musical tastes, but Page resisted. He wanted the band to remain rooted in its mystical blues-driven origins, while Plant wanted to move forward. Each session, each argument, each compromise chipped away at their bond. Fans saw Robert Plant as the golden-hailed demigod of rock, but within Led Zeppelin he often felt like a second-class citizen. The real power rested with Jimmy Page and manager Peter Grant. Page dictated the set lists, the production, even the band's public image. Plant was expected to be the frontman, but not the leader. Behind closed doors he felt like he was just speaking for Page's genius. He wanted creative freedom but was met with resistance every time he tried to stand up for himself, even during live shows. Page's long guitar solos went on for minutes while Plant stood on stage waiting for his turn. The imbalance was clear, and it drove a wedge between them. As the years went by, Page's authority became too much to bear, and then tragedy struck in 1977, forever changing the balance of power. Kerak Plant, Robert Plant's 5-year-old son, died quickly of a stomach virus. It broke his heart. He felt empty and questioning everything, including his role in Led Zeppelin. The music that used to fuel his soul now felt meaningless. Every lyric, note, and performance became a painful reminder of what he had lost. He wanted to disappear, to step away from the spotlight, so he could grieve without the pressure of being famous. You know that Robert Plant, the rock god, writes a spring Penthean feast, which goes on for days and days with stories of them hitting bowls over their heads, but Page was angry and thought the band had to keep going no matter what. Even though he was going through a terrible personal tragedy, he couldn't understand why Plant would think about giving up on everything. His response wasn't just cold, it was almost inhuman. While Plant's world fell apart, Page remained fixated on Led Zeppelin, oblivious to the pain that was tearing the band apart from within. Their lack of empathy cut deeper than any argument or creative clash and widened the chasm between them to an unbridgeable point. Plant never forgot and never forgave Page. In his darkest moments, he realized that Led Zeppelin had never really been his in the first place, it had always belonged to Page. In his grief, he realized that he was nothing more than a pawn in Page's never-ending quest for musical immortality. He felt stuck in something he no longer loved, and his anger, resentment, and desire to leave all grew. For the first time, he didn't just want to leave, he wanted to destroy it all. While Plant dealt with loss, Page fell deeper and deeper into his own darkness. The man who used to be in charge of every note and second of Led Zeppelin's music was now losing it. It was clear that his heroin addiction was hurting his acts. His behavior and control over band practices became unbearable. Some nights Page was a guitar god who could easily bend sound into magic. Other nights he was a ghost who was lost in a day of drugs and exhaustion. The band never knew which version of Page they would get. Fans who used to be amazed by his genius were now talking about his decline. The energy that used to fill stadiums was flashing and dimming because of his drug use, but that wasn't the only thing that turned him off. Page's famous interest in the occult turned into more than just a curiosity, it turned into an obsession. In the late 1917s, he became more deeply involved in the dark arts, reading esoteric texts and performing rites and symbols that scared people around him. He had already bought Aleister Crowley's famous Bowkine house, which had a lot of dark past. There were rumors that Page was doing strange rituals inside, black magic and dark energy followed him everywhere. Some bandmates thought it was just for show, but others weren't so sure. Plant, who had always been more spiritual, was becoming more and more disturbed by Page's obsession. The eerie atmosphere around Page was starting to feel like it was suffocating him. Was he just trying to create an image, or was it something much darker? It was no longer just music for the band, it was also about controlling power and something much worse. Plant was unhappy, but his drug use wasn't the only thing that made him want to leave. In the late 1700s, Page's famous interest in the occult grew stronger. He had already bought Aleister Crowley's famous Boleskine house, and rumors of strange rites were going on there. There was black magic and dark energy around him. Page's obsessions were making Plant, who had always been more spiritual, more and more upset. The band wasn't just about music, it was about power and something much darker, and Plant wanted out by the early 1980s. The rift was irreparable after the death of drummer John Bonham in 1980, Led Zeppelin broke up, but it wasn't a clean break. Page wanted to keep the dream alive and bring the band back in some way, but for Plant, the dream had already turned into a nightmare. He didn't want to be stuck in Page's never-ending search for nostalgia for years. Page desperately wanted a Zeppelin reunion to reclaim his former glory, bring back the legend, and show that the magic wasn't dead. He kept trying to get in touch with Plant, suggesting comeback tours that hinted at a revival that never happened, but Plant refused. He was sick of being overshadowed, sick of the chaos that came with Page, and sick of the never-ending cycle of too much control and dysfunction. He didn't want to be a ghost of his former self chained to a band that had already burned to the ground. He wanted his own voice, path, and story, free from the weight of Led Zeppelin. Plant's refusal became the final insult. Page saw it as treason, but Plant saw it as a way to stay alive. One man holding on to the past, and the other running towards the future, leaving behind the ruins of a band that once ruled the world but fell apart from the inside. Page's problems didn't stop with Robert Plant. His life was full of trouble, not just with his famous lead singer. Over the years, he had fights with bandmates, other artists, and even people close to him, leaving behind broken relationships and unresolved anger. After years of staying out of the spotlight, Paul Jones watched as Page and Plant basked in the glory of Led Zeppelin's success. Jones wasn't given much attention, and his contributions were ignored. His voice wasn't heard, and the anger built up over the years. When Plantage got back together in the 1920s, they insulted Jones the most by not even inviting him. A silent war had begun, and Jones would never forget the betrayal. The Black Crowes conflict was another example of Page's history of broken partnerships. In the early 2000s, Page and the Black Crowes had what seemed like a promising partnership, but it quickly fell apart. Page, who was used to being the clear leader, struggled to compromise his vision, which clashed with the band's, and his need for control stifled any creative freedom. The relationship soured, the collaboration fell apart, and Page found himself at odds with those around him once more. The legal fights over Zeppelin's legacy were like a storm that never stopped following Page for decades. What was once praised as a masterpiece of music was called into question when copying claims were made. Several cases were filed saying that Page had taken riffs and melodies from unknown artists and used them in Zeppelin's biggest hits without giving credit. His reputation as a guitar god was now tainted by whispers of theft. The courtroom became yet another battleground where Page fought to defend his legacy while critics tore it apart. Family struggles and isolation were perhaps Page's greatest demons. While the world saw a rock icon, those closest to him saw a man drifting further into solitude. His obsession with secrecy created walls that even his family couldn't break through. Relationships crumbled, connections faded, and addiction only pushed him Further into isolation, he had once commanded crowds of thousands, yet in his personal life he stood alone, a shadow of the man who once ruled the stage. Today Led Zeppelin remains one of the greatest rock bands of all time, but the scars of its internal battles have never fully healed. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page may exchange pleasantries in public, but the old wounds remain for Plant. Led Zeppelin was a chapter of his life, a glorious, chaotic, and painful chapter. For Page it was his entire identity. One he has never fully been able to move past. The world sees them as legends, but behind the curtain they are simply two men forever bound by music, conflict, and a past that refuses to be forgotten. And now, with Plant finally speaking out, the truth of their turbulent history is clearer than